Welcome to the Ealy House Museum. The museum is owned and operated by the New Albany, Plain Township Historical Society. The museum is here to preserve and promote the history of the local area. The house was built in 1860 by George Ealy. He was a German immigrant who spent time in Pennsylvania before he moved to Central Ohio. He owned about 73 acres here around the farm, where he had an orchard and also a sawmill. He had several different kinds of animals for the family's own use. Come on in and enjoy your tour of the Ealy House. We're beginning our tour with the front hallway. I want to call your attention to the banister. It is all one piece, most likely cherry, that starts about 2 feet up from the top of the stairway, clear to the curve at the bottom. It most likely is cherry wood. Also, I want to call your attention to the wood pieces that face this hallway. They are of black walnut, but George Ealy thought so little of the walnut tree, since he had so many of them here on the farm, that he had an artist paint them to look like a much richer wood, most likely oak. This is the guest parlor. It would be reserved for adults. I'd like to call your attention to the game table. It belonged to Elizabeth Carpenter, who is Naomi Fodor's grandmother. It would be brought out from the wall and turned to a 45-degree angle, and then it could be used for 4 people comfortably playing cards. There was storage underneath the tabletop for cards, etc. The lamp and most of the lamps in the museum came from the Fodor family, and this one was either kerosene or oil. The molding in this room is somewhat interesting. We would consider molded pine very common today, but in the day of George Ealy, it was a luxury. Therefore, it was reserved for the major room of the house. The stove is not original to the house. We purchased it because it was period accurate. It was actually manufactured in Columbus about the time of the house. The artwork in this room and the rest of the house was by Ethel Schleppe, a local artist all of her life. She graduated from Otterbein University in 1909, which was unusual for a woman of that time to have a 4-year education in college. The furniture in this room was in the Congregational Church in 2nd Avenue in New Albany. It actually predates the house by about 10 years. It's 1850s, and originally it would be upholstered in horsehair fabric. It is now in the velveteen. It was also padded with horsehair because that's what they had. I call your attention to the area in the ceiling. When we removed about 4 layers of wallpaper during the renovation, we saw that the ceiling had been painted. It's called stenciling, and the same artist that did the woodwork may have done the stenciling. Most of the ceiling stenciling was too faded to save it, but we did save this very small piece for the house. The baby carriage underneath the one window predates the house also. The baby doll is a baby doll from Naomi Fodor. She is dressed in the christening gown of Mildred Underwood Babbitt, or Babbitt Underwood, excuse me. Her mother was the first lady mayor in New Albany, and that happened just after women's suffrage in 1920. The bookcase was in the Bob Goodrich house, which was just about a 10th or so mile north of Morse Road on New Albany Conduit, and it predates the house. The cabinet here in the corner belonged to Kern Harrington, actually the Kern family. We had a museum prior to this one on East Granville Road, And this was the one piece that we moved over from that museum. This is the family parlor. It was where the family would gather. The children would do their homework. If they had their homework done and the farm chores done, they could enjoy a game of checkers or dominoes. We have a lot of storage in this room, which is surprising for a house of this age. We keep our Depression glass collection from Elizabeth Shockey Feichter in one of these cabinets. The molding in this room is the black walnut, and you can see that. This room has one of the 2 working fireplaces on this floor. You will notice that it has been bricked up because they had a chimney fire in this room. Therefore, the fireplace could never be used again. The rest of the downstairs floor had just mantles. They were made to look nice, and they would have had either a wood-burning or coal-burning stove coming out from the wall to heat the rooms. On top of the mantle, we have a picture that was taken in about 1920, and it is of a community picnic that was held annually at Swickard Woods, but it is not the Swickard Woods that we have today. This Swickard Woods was on US 62 South, about where the Nazarene Church is today. We do have a narrow closet here in this room, as we do in the bedrooms upstairs. This makes us believe that this room could double as a bedroom if they had somebody crippled or temporarily too ill to climb the stairs. The furniture in this room is actually newer than the house. It is mission style from about 1890s up to about 1910. We have this room also fixed out as a place to keep our schoolroom artifacts. On the table, we can see how the children carried their books to school. They had straps that fitted around the books and then through a handle, and then off they went. I tease to the students that we have come through that this is the original backpack. We do have a school desk from one of the one-room schoolhouses. We had around 8 around the township, and they were in use until the 1920s. The 1925 building opened up on the school campus on that time. We do have a grade card from the Swickard family from the year 1925, and that could have been from that school when it first opened. We have a Board of Education, of course a paddle, and we have a slate board. Paper was very, very expensive, so they took all their notes with chalk and a chalkboard. Any items they were handing into the teacher had to be done in ink on the expensive paper. This room is also set up as a music room. We have an old trumpet and an old accordion. We also have a music cabinet in this room. This is the formal dining room. It would have been very busy for the noonday, which they called dinner, because you had the mill workers and the farm workers along with the family. The table here is from the Fodor family. This is another one of the operational fireplaces. It is with the black walnut molding. Above it is a clock that actually works when we remember to wind it. We have a pass-through that goes from the kitchen into the dining room, and they would have used that to send the hot dishes through to the major table. This is another reason why we feel that the Ealy House is just a little cut above a normal farmhouse. In the far wall, we have a pie safe, and this normally would not be in the dining room. This would have been in the kitchen, but this is where we have room for it. The doors are a tin work, and they are not only in a pretty pattern, but these holes are clear through to allow just a little bit of air to keep the baked goods fresh, while keeping any varmint out, like mice and insects.
The kitchen was a very important room in a farmhouse, a place of constant activity. Meals were prepared here for the family and for workers. Dishes were washed, clothes may have been ironed here. Burn marks on the floor in front of the mantel tell us that an iron wood-burning cook stove always stood there. The stove was a source of heat for providing hot water, cooking food, and even heating that part of the house. Its stovepipe would have attached to the chimney over the mantel, just as it does now, for this iron step stove, which we installed in 2018, and which was made in Ohio in 1855. The Amish scene on the wall over the mantel was painted by Ruth Dorn Hilbert, who was the last occupant of this Ealy House. Just beyond the stove is a pass-through cupboard opening to both the dining room and the kitchen. The green wood cupboard comes from an 1850 Swickard farmhouse, which once stood just down the road. The oak round table was found in the attic of this house, and we believe belonged to the Ealy family. It served as a work surface, and of course also a place for family meals. Many items of interest can be seen on and near this table, including cast iron cooking pots and pans, a wooden bowl, irons for ironing clothes, a butter mold, old cookie cutters, and a candle mold. Hanging on the wall, you see 2 oil lamps, reminding us that there was no electricity in the house for many years. Beneath the table is a handmade braided rug, typical of rugs made by early families using wool from discarded clothing. Note the large bucket with dipper for drinking water, which had to be carried in from the well near the barn. We are reminded that many trips everybody had to make every day to bring in water for drinking, cooking, and washing. And just as many trips had to be made back to the yard to dump the dirty water outside. Hanging on the wall near the porch door are sleigh bells, a rug beater, and a razor strop. The pantry provided much-needed storage for cooking utensils and preserved foods. In winter, it served as a refrigerator if the door was kept closed. But in the early 1900s, a hand pump and sink were installed in the pantry. The pitcher pump, as it was called, brought water from a cistern into the house. The cistern collected rainwater from the roof, and although rainwater was not pure enough for drinking, it was nice for washing. And another drawback was, of course, that rainwater was not a dependable source. However, it was a luxury to have water available in the house, and a luxury to have the drain that sent the dirty water out of the house. Next to the pantry door is the door to the central hall. And next to the hall door is the door to the basement stairs. And the last and final door goes to the dining room.
As we ascend the stairway to the second floor, admire the banister, beautifully crafted before the era of power tools, yet very sturdy today. The arrangement of rooms on the second floor follows the pattern seen on the first floor. There are 4 large bedrooms arranged symmetrically, 2 on either side of the staircase and central hall. These bedrooms provided sleeping space for several generations living together in the house, as well as relatives and long-distance visitors. A storage closet at the top of the stairs provided space to store extra bedding and trunks belonging to visitors. This room is set up as a master bedroom might have looked in the late 1800s, with a handmade rope bed covered with a soft mattress and a handmade quilt. Depending on what the family had available, the mattress might have been stuffed with straw or feathers from geese or chickens from the farm. The pillows would have had feather or down stuffing. Under the bed is a chamber pot. Chamber pots were commonly used in the 1800s when there was no plumbing in the house. No one wanted to go outside to use the backyard outhouse at night, in the dark, particularly in cold winter weather. The chamber pots would have needed to be carried downstairs and emptied every morning. This is the only room in the house with red oak floors. The washstand with wash basin and pitcher allowed family members to wash their face and hands in the bedroom. Because there was no plumbing, the water would have been carried up from the well in the backyard. If they wanted warm water for washing, they would have had to heat it on the stove in the kitchen before carrying it upstairs. The many quilts we see in this room demonstrate early recycling efforts. Garments were hand-sewn and were handed down from one family member to another, and when they became worn out, the good parts of the fabric were cut up and turned into handmade quilts for bedding. Nothing was wasted. Another example of recycling can be seen in the handmade braided wool rug on the floor in this room. Other items of interest in this room include a chest displaying a hand-woven coverlet, the Swickard family spindle cradle, and an armoire. This bedroom is set up as a craft room to display weaving, spinning, and sewing equipment. Early settlers had to be self-sufficient, and even in the 1860s, many items were made by hand. The large spinning wheel in this room was used for spinning flax fibers. The sewing machine was powered by a foot treadle. Local residents grew flax in their farm fields and raised sheep for wool and meat. The grate in the floor of this room allowed warm air to come up from the real fireplace in the dining room below. It also probably allowed curious children to eavesdrop on their older relatives talking around the dining table. The large heritage quilt on the wall illustrates the homes, roads, and farms of New Albany and Plain Township between 1800 and 1899. It was made by members of the Historical Society. A collection of metal and handmade wooden children's toys are also seen in this room. Children's toys tended to be small versions of adult tools and furnishings. The closet in this room, and in all the bedrooms on this floor, is very narrow and contains hooks for clothing. It is not deep enough to allow for a rod and hangers. This room holds medical supplies and equipment that belonged to Dr. Essel, a longtime New Albany family doctor who practiced in the mid-1900s. The antique cradle in this room came from the Yantis family. William Yantis was one of the founders of New Albany. Many of the Native American arrowheads and tools in our collection were found in the nearby fields of the Swickard farm, and some were found right here in the attic of the Ealy House, probably collected and left by Ealy or Dorn children. From this room, a staircase leads to the attic. The walls of the stairway contain the names written in pencil by George Ealy of the craftsmen who built the house. Numerous Ealy and Dorn children who lived here also scrawled their names and dates on these walls. On the upstairs landing is an antique pump organ that dates to 1890. It is similar to the organ the Dorn family had in this spot. Before the era of gramophones and radios, if people wanted to listen to music, they had to make it themselves. It would not have been uncommon for people to play organs and fiddles and other instruments for the enjoyment of the family. The antique doll carriages contain china dolls that belonged to Naomi Fodor and her mother, Lizzie Carpenter.
The basement of the Ealy House was a place where many family chores were done. When the family was canning or preserving food for the winter, it was frequently prepared in the basement kitchen. Foods like apple butter and apple cider, which were made in large quantities, would most likely have been prepared here. The door to the basement was extra wide, so a wheelbarrow could be hauled all the way into the basement without unloading it. The basement contained several storage rooms where apples from the owner's orchard could be kept until they were cooked or sold at market. In the summer, families frequently cooked in the basement to keep the upper levels of the house a little cooler. Chores that were done outside in the summer, like laundry, were done in this room in the winter. The family could boil water over the fire to wash their clothes. Wool would have been spun into yarn. Shoes and tools would have been repaired. And wood would have been carved into kitchen cooking utensils, bowls, and plates here. Apple butter would have been made in the kettles, and apple cider would have been made in the apple press. Doing this work in the basement would have kept the other parts of the house a little cleaner. Tools like the ones displayed in our tool room were originally kept in the Ealy's barn. Later, the barn was torn down, so we keep our tools in the basement now. Our collection includes an ox yoke owned by one of the earliest families who lived in our area. The ox yoke was used by the Swickards to pull their wagon when they walked to Ohio from the East Coast in the early 1800s. This ox yoke is probably the oldest item in the Historical Society's collection. The tool room also includes a corn sheller and numerous woodworking tools like hammers and chisels, levels, planes, and hand drills. Our collection also includes a number of saws similar to those used in our area to cut trees into logs for building houses. Many farmers in the area hauled their logs to the Ealy's barn so they could be cut into boards in the Ealy's sawmill. They then used these boards to build their houses and their barns. Our collection also includes blacksmithing tools donated by Rudy Sever, one of the founders of the Historical Society. Most of the things needed to build the house were found right here on the property. Trees were cut down to make the floors, woodwork, windows, and doors. Clay from the hill behind the house was made into bricks. The stones in the foundation were taken from the stream right behind the house. Only a few things, like glass in the windows and the hardware on the doors, had to be purchased from others. Thank you so much for touring the Ealy House. The New Albany Plain Township Historical Society hopes you will return again soon.